Hi listeners, thanks again for joining for another episode in my Ellevate series with your host, me, Becky. In this podcast, we talk about all things women empowerment, challenges in the recruitment industry, career progression, and anything else that is empowering women in business. Thanks for listening, and please remember to follow and subscribe for all updates. Thank you so much for joining me today, Lima. Looking forward to this conversation. So really excited to discuss today the role of women in FinTech and on a personal level, how you got into FinTech and a bit about your experience living in Denmark and how it's all going. So Lima and I have met at an event earlier this year. We've been in touch ever since. I've been kind of discussing the world of startups, scale-ups in Copenhagen. So lots to explore in this conversation. So very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. And yeah, great to be on the podcast.
Do you want to start out and maybe just give everyone a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, originally I'm from Nottingham, which is like slap bang in the center of the UK. I studied, first of all, at Exeter University, biological sciences, so completely unrelated to what I do now. And then I did a postgrad in journalism in London. And then I've also done ongoing education. So like a mini marketing MBA and various other online studying to make sure, I'm up to date on things within marketing, things within finance, and of course, as my role has progressed as management, as a leader, and all that kind of stuff. In relation to my career, I guess I've worked internationally in communication and marketing for about 13 years now. I was actually in the fastest growing tech company in the UK, and then in Denmark, I was the head of marketing at the fastest growing company in Denmark. And now I'm head of marketing at another fast-growing fintech in Copenhagen. It's called Monthio. We're an open banking solution which supports loan approval and helping banks meet regulations in Europe.
Great, thank you for that. So let's get into it then. So if you don't mind, maybe just give us a quick introduction on how did you get into the fintech world? Because as you said, you started out studying biological sciences, then worked in media, journalism, and big change into financial technology. So how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been passionate about, I guess, writing and communication, even as I want to say a child, but probably more a teenager. And then when I was studying biology, I found I was actually really good at communicating it. So turning complex, some people might say boring information into interesting stories that people understand and found interesting. So initially I wanted to be a science reporter. So that's why I took a postgrad in journalism in London. However, after I got a job in London as a reporter, I mean, some of it was really fun, interviewing Tim Henman and Rick Stein and all those kind of people.
Wow.
But at the same time, it was completely low paid. So I decided to take the leap, and it's called going into the dark side, and swap to a marketing role in a tech company. As I said, the company ended up being the fastest growing tech company in the UK when I was there. And it really unlocked my passion for supporting the growth of startups and scale-ups, being very exciting and making changes and supporting fast growth. And then obviously that was more general tech. And then you asked about, finance and fintech. And again, really, it was something I fell into. A CEO at a former company ended up being something of a mentor. And he suggested the role at my previous job, which was fintech. So I was started there probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's how the journey began.
Thanks for that. And how was it kind of to start then? So you mentioned that when you decided to go into maybe more the communication side, it was because you were really passionate about explaining things and felt that that was a kind of transferable skill that you had. Were there any other key skills that you found helpful through your earlier career that transferred well into FinTech?
I think initially from journalism into kind of startup scale-ups, as you mentioned, there was the communication skills, but then also the ability to dig deeper into complex issues, to not be afraid to ask difficult questions. You know, I was so used to speaking to police officers or celebrities, that kind of speaking to the C-suite didn't faze me in a way it might faze other kind of 23-year-olds with as little experience as I had. I was used to being like, okay, well, how can we get more information on this? Is this really important? So I guess that kind of extra confidence without fear of hierarchy. And I think as well, like, effective in internal communication came from that, because again, I was very used to asking people for favors and explaining why they should do it, you know, when trying to get an interview or something like that. And then I guess from, you know, this high growth company, which was in tech, into finance, was the ability to deal with, you know, quickly changing priorities. And I think most importantly, like, not being afraid of failures, like learning that they're positives. Incredible, innovative CEOs that drive these fast growth companies are also human and want to be challenged. And, you know, I think that's been very useful in my career. Like, I will chase up people and tell them what to do and not be afraid of the repercussions, because again, I know how to work with these kind of genius CEOs, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I like the point around kind of learning how to ask the right questions. Maybe there's sometimes difficult questions, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, that's what a journalist does, right? And then how about if you're not like super into finance or economics or statistics? Is it easy to still transition? Does it, I guess, make a difference what role you take in a fintech?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the role and seniority. And I think also the industry that you're targeting, because if you're, for example, targeting car finance, then maybe finance isn't relevant, but understanding cars is. If you've worked in a high growth company, as I was talking about, that having that experience is maybe more important than finance, or, you know, SaaS companies. Again, I would say it's relevant to the roles, you know, especially when you're talking about very specific financial kind of regulations, anti-money laundering, all that kind of stuff. I guess that would be important. Or again, if you're a small company based in Denmark, but you want to go into Spain, having someone that's a Spanish speaker is probably more important again than necessarily deep financial experience. Of course, high growth fintechs, you know, they value certain job or degree experience. But I think what's really valuable is, as I mentioned before, the skills that I sort of had was dealing with how to deal with rapid change in a high growth environment. Like, you don't get the same stability in certain financial companies. I mean, you do in banks, of course, but there's still a lot of rapid changes, especially now due to like inflation, regulations, and other various things.
For sure.
When it comes to me personally, like, I'm growing my team, and I grew it at my previous job too. And I would always hire someone who has, you know, a can-do attitude and the ability to challenge me rather than financial experience, because I think that's so much more important in any role, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess some of those kind of regulations, they change, right? So the reality is you probably need to keep updated and learn those as you go. But as you say, like a can-do attitude, that sort of mentality is probably the part that that's not so easy to teach. So, you know,
Right.
you want to kind of come into it with that kind of mindset, and perhaps that would make it easier to transition into like a fintech type of role. I guess also depends on, as you say, like the position that you maybe take. So if you want to specialize in anti-money laundering, then maybe you need to have that experience. But if you sometimes, right, correct me if I'm wrong, it sometimes is quite interesting to have a marketeer or a salesperson or a HR professional who's maybe not necessarily come from that industry, because they can actually bring in some slightly fresher perspectives or new ways of doing things and sort of challenging the status quo, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything you've said, to be honest. You know, within banking and finance, there's been more regulation or more regulatory change across the world. But I mean, we focus mainly in Europe, like in the last 5 years, and there have been in the last 100. And I think, you know, there's so much change within the tech space and especially financial space as well. You know, how tech is incorporating with that governments are really struggling to keep up. So it's almost like adding regulations very, very rapidly and fining and stopping trading of banks and other corporations. So again, having an understanding of what's going on in the market and having an understanding of how to react quickly to changes can be as valuable as the relevant experience. Again, obviously, as you said, if you need an AML or anti-money laundering specialist, then you probably need to have that experience.
Yeah, sure. No, makes sense. Okay. So how about being a woman in FinTech? Have you faced any challenges? If so, what have those been like?
You know, being a woman in FinTech or finance is still really difficult. I think, especially, you know, for younger women or youngish women, I'm not just talking about myself here, but some of my colleagues who are in a senior role, like sometimes it's still assumed we are secretaries or assistants or more junior than we are, and that we don't have as much knowledge as other males, or certainly as much credibility. Even the men with far less experience than us will still think that they hold more experience than us, or other people will have that perception. I think it's so interesting about how important it is for women to dress older or more professionally than men. I think if you think about, you know, tech CEOs, they can come to work or speak at an event or take a customer meeting in like an old hoodie and trainers. Like I had a boss that didn't even used to wear shoes to the office, like a founder, and people still respected them or will respect them as a genius. But as a woman, like if we did that, it would be, you know, assume that we're bad at our job, bad at timekeeping, we can't prioritize certain things, and maybe have other distractions outside the workplace and just generally aren't professional. So it's kind of quite archaic in a way that our appearance is still very like divided depending on gender, or maybe not appearance like aesthetically in the face, but definitely how we dress and how we prioritize kind of formal wear.
Yeah, presenting, how you present yourself, right? Perhaps there's a underlying notion that, you know, you have a little bit more to prove, or I suppose speaking of FinTech, like old school, if you will, banks is quite corporate. Appreciate, obviously, we're kind of more talking about the startups and sort of the scale-ups of the world, but perhaps there's an underlying still kind of feeling around like, okay, well, you know, this is how like we used to do things. And I suppose after the pandemic, things have sort of changed as well. With everyone was working from home, dress codes definitely maybe were relaxed whilst people were at home. But obviously then back in the office, there's maybe a shift to back towards that more kind of formal or corporate, not necessarily corporate. I suppose each city has different nuances of that as well. But having that kind of different judgments maybe is the case.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to the corporate uniform. Like I have a lot of friends within, or colleagues or networking buddies who are or have been in the banking, insurance industries and more internationally larger corporations. And I think it was only within the last like 2 or 3 years, I don't know if you remember, when like there was a financial company that like allowed women not to wear high heels in the office. And, you know, whilst men in the more traditional banking, traditional insurance companies can often get away with the open shirt, maybe not wearing the tie anymore, it's still really important for women to be in their power suits and gazebo tops to like seem professional. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you've seen from companies who are trying to combat this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one because I would like to say there are increasing women in finance, and you can see that the CEO of Starling Bank in the UK, Anne Boden, to generally in the workforce. But I still find that while there may be more women in finance than of course there were 10, 20 years ago, if you go to the leadership level or, you know, who's on the board, it's still mostly men. And that's I think, a global thing, even within Scandinavia, which is known for its gender equality. I believe this is down to sort of two aspects. Of course, if you have a predominantly male network, you're going to hire and trust others that look like you or you know from your previous roles. And if that role was filled with men, the chances are you're going to hire another man. And I also think there's lack of belief from unconscious bias that a woman isn't leadership material. And I feel like I've definitely seen men with less experience in higher positions in the C-suite than women with more experience, or who may be older,
Yeah.
I do think larger companies are acting to support and promote women, some with targets and programs. But I do really worry that this is like lip service rather than something that is really acted upon. Again, if you're looking at the board or the leadership team, I don't see much promotion or breaking of the glass ceiling within the financial industry.
Yeah, I think there's still a long way to go, right? For sure.
100%.
So being a finance first company, have you ever experienced, and maybe not in your direct company, but perhaps through events that you've attended or with customers or clients externally, have you experienced any unconscious bias yourself? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I would say maybe it's not even unconscious bias,
Just
but
conscious.
it's just very conscious. But maybe I think, I in my previous role and my current role, attending a lot of events related to payments or banking, all over the world. But again, even in Scandinavia, I've personally, networked with men who've appeared like absolutely shocked at my knowledge of the industry. And I guess, attending these events, again, it's predominantly men who attend. I mean, the only advantage probably is there's no queues for the lady queues for once. But I mean, further than that, it's generally quite disheartening to see. And this is quite awful as well, but if you're at an event, you're kind of three women on the booth or on the stand, then there can be assumptions that you're attractive women placed on the stands to attract the men in, or it's called like booth babes I think generally across all events rather than just finance, rather than high level professionals. And I think there's often that thing of, oh, like, nice to meet you, let me speak to the expert about, again, another younger male. I do think it's changing. I do believe there is going to be less conscious or unconscious bias as more women enter the workforce. I believe as more women like move through the ranks, the balance of expectations of women should change. And of course, I have to emphasize now we are talking about unconscious bias, and that's why I'm kind of highlighting these issues. I've also had a lot of really good experiences too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you probably have experienced the similar things it's not unique to the fintech industry, right? I think it's probably something that women probably face in whether it be sales, technology in general, cybersecurity, predominantly engineering, like any kind of historically male dominated environment. I think, there's still a long way to go with that. And you mentioned like you try not to take it personally, but of course, sometimes you work really hard to make a pitch, or you've done a lot of research, and you've come up with this amazing solution for a client, and it must feel quite a bit of gutting to have presented that, and then them ask the questions to the male in the room, like, okay, how did you guys come up with this? And it's like, well, hold on a second, I actually own that. But I guess there's solace in knowing that there's other people out there experiencing the same thing. And I think the more it's spoken about, the better off it will become. But as you say, it's certainly not the end of that road. And I think we'll continue to face those kind of unconscious bias. And how about women's empowerment and how it's maybe changing the fintech landscape? What's the benefits of having women in fintech from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, while of course I support the, increased growth and development of women in finance, or as you mentioned, any industry, like whether it's STEM or whatever, like I believe, diversity from all walks of life create a better attitude towards problem solving, international growth, different perspectives, educational backgrounds, cultures, genders, professional backgrounds, really enhance, creativity and problem solving. I think having homogenous companies, whether it's via any of those kind of things, is not a great thing. So of course, as I said, having more women in finance is important, but as so are other minority groups. And I think the clearest benefit I actually see is by having more women or any minority group in any industry, you will kind of see that hopefully more people from that group will want to get involved as they see more people who look like them, who are speaking or represent their group, who are in the office, on the website of the company they're applying for, or who are at events, or whose photo is in the newspaper, right? I think all of that is important, and all of those groups and diversity in a workplace is super important.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So then, Lima, let's talk about your move to Denmark. How was it?
So I've actually lived here for approximately 7 years now, and that was after I'd spent 2 years in Vietnam and a few years in London. And, like many expats here, I did move for a partner. And, I think I initially struggled with the cold and the dark, especially after coming from Southeast Asia. But I soon came to love, the beauty and the small size of the city. And I know you've been here a couple of times, so you know how much people cycle about. And I really love that. It's much better than the Northern Line in London.
Anything is better than that.
Yeah, I don't miss that at all. Of course, there were challenges in the start. I mean, getting lost, understanding where stuff is in the supermarket, not knowing where good restaurants were. I think a lot of people, when they move to a new country, might struggle with language. And I think Danish is notorious for being one of the hardest languages in the world to learn. But I think as a small country, most companies here, they have to internationalize for success. So it's a very international work environment, and many companies have English as a corporate language and value native English speakers or fluent English speakers. So again, I've always found, despite not being fluent in Danish yet, still being able to have access to good job opportunities here.
Amazing. Was there a big culture shock when you arrived when it comes to working life, especially in comparison to London and then Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, the Danish work-life balance, I think, is pretty famous for being unbeatable. As well as the importance put on extensive maternity leave, but more importantly for me, I feel it's extensive paternity leave. So different to the UK, and I personally, I don't want children, but I feel really sad for my friends back in London when I hear how much they struggle with work and have to give up work, and the 2-week paternity for men, whereas in Denmark it's normally 4 months to a year. In Sweden it's about 2 years, and this means it's as easily my male colleagues doing the school run or staying at home with a sick kid. And this really helps women progress, right? Going back to work, and they're not held back, because if your partner's only taken 2 weeks paternity leave, then obviously the woman will be the one caring for the sick child. So I think it's really progressive in that front. And actually, I believe it's Sweden where if a man doesn't take all his paternity leave, there's some kind of penalization to ensure this kind of equality, and not all the men are taking their fair share of responsibility after taking their fair share of creating the child in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well it goes back to our point around for progression of women into or senior roles. If there's a fundamental system where it's supported, then it does definitely help, right? And I think having spoken to a number of people in Copenhagen, including yourself, there's definitely more of that opportunity available for parents, which is good.
100%. And I guess I just wanted to say or add that on the other side, I can find it frustrating, the flat hierarchy in larger companies, which I've experienced here. So unlike in the UK or in Vietnam and the US, where there's a bit more like room for kind of like up growth. Everyone's opinion needs to be considered. And again, that means that projects can just take ages because every step needs to be considered by a million stakeholders. So again, that's the other reason why I really like joining these fast growth companies, which are far less like that. And you can push actions through and get results again, whether positive or negative, quickly learn and move on. So definitely two sides, but I've been very lucky to benefit from one and see the benefits of the other.
How did you like find it integrating into a brand new city?
So I will start with saying and stressing that as a Brit, I moved to the EU before Brexit. So that definitely made things a lot easier because I was still an EU citizen at that point. I also play a lot of sport like tennis and netball. So joining those clubs was like a real catalyst for making friends, and both international and Danish actually. I think also the move to Denmark was made much easier because I'd already done it before, right? I'd lived in Vietnam, so started from scratch, established a life there, made friends, got a job, like, so I knew I could do it. And, you know, I really recommend others try it because, you know, I've never met an expat who's like regretted it. They may complain about the Danish weather or like have small frustrations about the country they're in, but I mean, I think enough English people complain about England to kind of
That's very true.
compare. And yeah, I love how much I've learnt, and you know, the hype in the UK about Scandinavia is true. Like, it's filled with good-looking people. The house, the apartments are impeccable style, and you know, it's very aesthetically pleasing, as well as all the points I touched upon before about the work-life balance and job opportunities and all that kind of things, the fresh air, the clean environment. I mean,
Yeah,
you've been here several times, Becky, so you know what I'm speaking about. But
I do.
yeah.
And the food, which is also very good.
Oh, food, yeah, forgot that.
Say you were giving advice to someone thinking of moving or relocating to a new city, or maybe starting over in a new place. Networking sounds like that's an important part of it. How did you, like, it seems kind of daunting at first. Like, how did you go about it? What kind of advice would you give someone who's maybe considering that, or maybe they have just recently relocated to somewhere new?
It's an amazing point and so true, because I think there's both the kind of social aspect of networking, and many countries have these like professional women associations that can be helpful from a more social aspect. But I found like professionally and personally, like I've always been quite outgoing and found chatting to new people easy. So that's how I kind of enjoy networking, right? And actually, like one of the things I found in my previous role was that I was not only the most senior in the marketing team, and, you know, initially for a long time, the most senior woman in the company. That meant there was no one to mentor me, to spar with, discuss issues on an equal level. So I actually decided to reach out to other women in finance across Copenhagen, you know, other CMOs or heads of marketing, just kind of via LinkedIn, like one Sunday evening, like, okay, I'll be super ballsy and reach out to these important people. And now we meet once a month for like a roundtable lunch and discuss marketing, finance, and the challenges we face as women in the workforce. Yeah.
Amazing. That is so cool. And
Yeah.
as you say, kind of daunting at first to do it, but the reality is, and I've had a kind of similar experience, is that people are often very open to help, and they really are like, oh wow, it's quite flattering to receive that kind of message. And the reality is people are pretty good out there, and I think if you have some kind of value to give back, then they're also interested in kind of getting involved. I think it doesn't always come to everyone naturally, if they're a little bit more introverted. Perhaps sounds like you're not so much on the introvert side, but yeah, I think you have to kind of put yourself out there a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I might not be introvert, but I certainly suffer from like anxiety to somewhat. So I like have a great idea, or what I think is a great idea, execute it, and then be like, oh my God, what if everyone hates me, But I cannot like overestimate how important this has been, meeting inspiring women in a similar industries and roles. And, it's led to such great tools and advice, friendship. When I was job hunting, there was so much support, and even success in my current role, like has come, well, and my last role actually has come from meeting women. And you're so right. Like when I reached out to people, I was kind of like, hey, like I can't really find like anything like this in Copenhagen. Would you be interested? Like, and I only got positive feedback, and even with women more senior than me. And I just think for somebody that's maybe introvert is try something new. What's the worst that can happen? And I think, what is this like imposter syndrome, I think is very, very common in women. And I would say, don't worry about it if you feel like you don't have anything to contribute. If you're attending like a ready set up one, like just being there is enough. And, just being you is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. That's been an amazing conversation. I think it's really interesting to hear how you've gone through different industries and ended up being in the position that you're in today in a new country. I was going to say speaking a new language, but interacting with people who speak another language. Yeah, no, that's super inspiring as well. And I think some good tips for other people who might be in similar, scenarios to what you have been in the past. So thank you so much. Really good words of wisdom there. So last question to end us with. Where's next on your vacation bucket list?
I would love to go to Bhutan, but despite the rumors about working in finance, I think it's a bit out my budget for now, so it will have to remain on the bucket list.
It does look like an amazing place to visit. I think it'll be done at some point. But yeah, thank you so much, Lima. Look forward to catching up with you again soon, and see you later.
See you later. Thank you so much for having me.